One of the things we commonly discuss on this channel here is the advent of AI upon our world, and the potential consequences involved with invoking such unknowns on humanity. I'd very much like to start with some recent news that I was looking at yesterday. On the 18th of April 2017, Facebook founder and friend of Israel, Mark Zuckerberg, made some interesting announcements during the annual developers conference held by Facebook. He announced that they were developing technology that would allow users to communicate using only their minds. This technology will come in the form of implantable chips that will create a brain-computer interface, commonly referred to as BCI. It has been self-admittedly described as one of the several secret projects being developed in the mysterious R&D division Building 8 Labs. Now, for those of you who don't know what the R&D division Building 8 Lab is, Mashable, back in 2016, described it as a 22,000 square foot hardware and research development lab. It's kind of like the Area 51 of hardware and social engineering, where even governmental agencies get involved with secret programs, according to Facebook. Now, on the 19th of April, the very next day, former DARPA executive Regina Dugan, who also worked for Google's Advancement Projects divisions and currently heads the Building 8 division, told conference attendees that a research team of 60 engineers is currently developing technologies that will allow people to type 100 words per minute using only their minds. These BCI applications will also enable people to control augmented and virtual reality interfaces using only their thoughts. Now, the thing I want you to keep in mind is the fact that Facebook now has this type of technology that can read your thoughts with great precision. This will become an important factor as we move further on, so keep that in mind for now. And just before we do move on, I also want to take the time to remind people about Orwell's 1984, where the book talks about thought crimes. In other words, there are illegal thoughts that are not favoured by the powers that be. The reason that I bring this up is because it correlates with the idea of singularity. After all, how can you implement total control if you can't read people's minds? One not so secretive fact about Facebook is their artificial intelligence department, a whole department dedicated to artificial neural networks, facial recognition and personal learning softwares that actually have the ability to program themselves. In an article from Technology Review in March 2017, Tom Simonite had the opportunity to interview Yan Li, who's the director of Facebook's AI research group, and who also happens to be a hardline Zionist who acquired his education from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. In this interview, he claims, "We are very interested in the idea that a learning system should be able to predict the future." This is obviously related to their artificial neural networks and the way Facebook algorithms work. And to give you an idea of the already existing evolution in this self-learning AI software, also in March, Facebook announced that it has developed an AI-driven technology to identify users at risk of self-harm. Algorithms trained on report data from networks close to 2 billion users are constantly on the lookout for warning signs in their posts, comments and replies. So there it is, folks. The proof that Facebook does indeed analyse all of this data through their own advanced systems. So they're willing to admit that they have the ability to detect users at risk. So what else are they looking for? What else are they able to detect? What about the shit they are not telling us? Come on guys, are you connecting the dots yet? All of this is mainstream news now. None of this is hearsay or conjecture. Let's move on. Something I've been thinking about recently in regards to this research is just how impressionable and emotional people can be sometimes. I also wonder if AI has the ability to lie. For an example, has AI been able to program within itself a self-defense mechanism by which it can give the answers it wants us to have, in order to further cement its importance and solidify its existence? Or another way of looking at it, how do we know that we are not already at war with AI? How do we know that AI does not have the ability to lead us astray? Especially if it's something that's going to be connected to our thinking mind. And if you take on the worldview that we are not fighting against flesh and blood, but actual dark forces and spiritual intelligences, then you can begin to understand why so many people are looking at this topic today. If you consider all of these things that have come out in the open in the last 6 years, like Pizzagate, the spirit cooking, Baal worship, child sacrifice, and all of these other occult-related occurrences within the highest level of politics, it really begs the question, is there any connection worth considering? I say absolutely. Now with that said, the MIT Technology Review put out an article in 2017 titled, "The Dark Secret at the Heart of AI." They go on to say that no one really knows how the most advanced algorithms do what they do. That could be a problem. The first thing that's discussed in this article is the experimental self-driven vehicle developed by researchers at chip developer NVIDIA. The car didn't follow a single instruction provided by an engineer or a programmer. Instead, the car totally decided what to do. In other words, it relied entirely on an algorithm that it had taught itself to drive while watching humans do it. But one of the researchers on the team had this to say. But it's also a bit unsettling since it isn't completely clear how the car makes this decision. Information from the vehicle's sensors goes straight into a huge network of artificial neurons that process the data and deliver the commands required to operate the steering wheel, the brakes, and other systems. The result seems to match responses you'd expect from a human driver, but what if one day it decided to do something unexpected? Crash into a tree, or sat at a green light? As it stands now, it might be difficult to find out why. The system is so complicated that even the engineers who designed it may struggle to isolate the very reason for any single action. And you can't ask it. There is no obvious way to design such a system so that it could always explain why it did what it did. So just think about that for a moment. That's coming from one of the leaders in this field. Already in today's age, there are AI systems and mathematical models which can determine who make parole, who gets approved for a loan, who's eligible for a visa, who gets hired for a job, etc. But they are also looking to now incorporate this technology to determine what levels of dosage people need from the chemists, or whether or not someone will be diagnosed with a disease or even operated on, legal disputes, military decisions, etc. For me personally, this could be a problem in the making. All of these technologies are usually started out with good intentions, but there is always a much more darker reality at play behind the scenes in my opinion. So based on everything that we've already discussed today, we can clearly see that AI is becoming more and more harder to understand why it makes the decisions that it does, and yet it already is becoming more and more utilized as the automated decision-making process for us human beings. Just how far will the powers that be go with giving this technology more and more authority and control? Does this technology have the capabilities to set up the infrastructure in order to protect itself? These AI self-building systems are already becoming inscrutable, yet unpredictable. Towards the end of this very interesting article, they make mention of a research group operating on the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, who is already using something called Deep Patient, which is basically a medical program that can diagnose certain things to patients. They are quoted in saying, "Without any expert instruction, Deep Patient has discovered patterns hidden in hospital data that seem to indicate when people are on the way to a wide range of ailments, including cancer of the liver." Now that sounds like a pretty good thing, right? Let's keep reading. At the same time, Deep Patient is a bit puzzling. It appears to participate in the onset of psychiatric disorders, like schizophrenia, surprisingly well. But since schizophrenia is notoriously difficult for even physicians to predict, keyword being predict, Dudley, one of the head researchers, wondered how this was possible. The new tool offers no clue as to how it does this. We can build these models, but we don't know how they work. So my final thought on this, which brings me back to my original point I asked you guys to remember, is that Facebook now has this type of technology that can read your thoughts with great precision. Once they implement their new technology onto the world, alongside its self-learning algorithmic systems, do you want to give these corporations, like Facebook, that level of control? Also, if this is the stuff we know about today, just what the hell are the Israeli, American, Chinese and Russian governments working on in their secret programs that we'll never ever hear about? These are some of the questions that I hope you guys are also asking. For those of you who can see these problems, who might choose to reject this transhumanist culture, what happens when it becomes so normalized that it becomes a requirement? For those of you who are already familiar with the prophecy of the Mark of the Beast in the Book of Revelations, you can probably see how a lot of people believe that this is all emerging right around us as we speak.
AI is much more advanced than people realize, and the pace of progress is much greater than people realize. It'd be fairly obvious if you saw a robot walking around talking and behaving like a person, and be like, whoa, that's like, what's that? That would be really obvious. What's not obvious is a huge server bank in a dark vault somewhere with an intelligence that's potentially vastly greater than what a human mind can do. I mean, its eyes and ears would be everywhere. Every camera, every microphone, every device that's network accessible. That's really what AI means. It's not like a robot running around. The robots would simply be, they'd be like a finger of the AI.
So you yourself have invested in some AI companies like DeepMind and Vicarious.
Yeah.
Why?
I invested in those companies to keep an eye on them. I wanted to see how artificial intelligence was developing. If we're not careful about the advent of AI, it's possible that there could be what's called a bad utility function. A computer will do exactly what its goal is. Humanity's position on this planet depends on its intelligence. So if our intelligence is exceeded, it's unlikely that we will remain in charge of the planet.
What happens when you don't take this so-called Mark of the Beast? When such a thing is considered irrational, unscientific, or even insanity? Even if you are not religious, what happens if you just don't want to take that leap forward into the singularity, so to speak? How will you deal with being ostracized? Suddenly we will see a group of people being ridiculed by society in the same way that atheists and agnostics may ridicule some religious people today. This whole issue becomes shrouded in so much moral dogma, scientific uncertainty. It requires a complete act of faith in assuming that the AI system has only good intentions for us humans, despite it being a dark, emotionless machine. When the time comes, will you be willing to refuse the comforts of modern society? Will you be able to outlast the ridicule of your peers? Or will you follow the herd of sheep blindly? That's about all I have time for today, guys. I hope you like the videos. If you're new to the channel, please be sure to subscribe, as I'll be focusing more on this topic as it unfolds. As always everyone, thanks for watching.